I was never technical, but the roles I was always in never required me to be technical. So I was always like a business analyst, like working with the client to understand their requirements, to understand like their priorities, to understand how their business ran. And then I would basically be like the middleman to communicate what the vision was with the developers, both onshore and offshore, like overseas. But in that, like, I guess in that growth in that role, like I grew into like a work stream leader. So like I had my own work stream, like I had
Wow.
management experience as well. In that experience, like I started realizing how much like I, even though my management was like, you don't need to go like learn Salesforce or get the certifications, I was like, I want to be more effective. And I feel like
Yeah.
to be more effective, you have to actually learn how the technology runs, like not necessarily how to code, but you have to understand like what the developers are thinking in terms of like trade-offs. So I went and got like a few of my Salesforce certifications. But yeah, Accenture was basically like my taste, like my first taste into like the tech world.
That's awesome. And Tiff kind of mentioned something really important there is that if you do kind of pursue a life in consulting or role in consulting, you're going to be put on clients like Chevron, like Salesforce, like Google, many different clients, right? And the best consultants I've ever worked with were really familiar with how the technology work, and they're really familiar with the ins and outs of their client's business. So Tiffany, she actually put the work in, got the certificates for Salesforce, and then when she went to work with the client, she was able to really speak their language and really maneuver around the technology. Even if she didn't have a technical experience or background, she made it her priority and responsibility to really learn everything she could and present herself as someone who is more technical and averse with learning certain technologies. So one thing too, Tiff, you mentioned how you transferred from working with the client to actually becoming a member of Salesforce, right? I've seen that happen a ton at Google, as well as other friends who've worked in consulting. How did you make that switch from consultant to actually working for your client at Salesforce?
Yeah. I want to clarify, Salesforce actually wasn't my client. I know people who worked on the Salesforce like account. I worked on like a banking client where they were
Okay,
implementing Salesforce. So that was like my introduction to what Salesforce was.
even better.
Um, yeah, so it was cool, like actually like learning the technology itself, replacing like outdated bank systems. But my transition from Salesforce, or sorry, from consulting to industry, so out of consulting, into Salesforce, um, was a pretty like, it was both like straightforward in that
Mhm.
like I went to Salesforce and I had experience in Salesforce, so that was kind of straightforward. But also I had no idea what that post consulting role is going to look like. Like a lot of my friends
Interesting.
were going into like strategy or
Strategy,
operations
yeah.
role, and then one random like day on LinkedIn, I had a Salesforce recruiter hit me up. And then she was like, "Do you want to interview for a solution engineer role?" Never heard about that before. I almost like declined it. I was like, I can't code. Like that's not
Yeah,
going to be a good job
yeah.
for me. And then she was like, "Oh no, it's actually like no coding is like required in this role. It's a pre-sales role." And then I was like, I don't want to be in sales. Like I don't like you think of like car salesman and
Mhm,
like
mhm.
that's just like not the life I like really imagine. But I was like, I was getting a little burnt out from consulting and I was very open to having conversations. And then I went through the interview process was like pretty rigorous. Like I talked to 7 different people. Like I had 7 different like interviews before going into a final panel round.
Mhm.
Um, but after like I went through the process, I just like fell in love with how much the pre-sales consulting role. So for those of you who've never heard of solution engineering, it's also called sales engineering, pre-sales consultant, sometimes systems engineering. This role is like the perfect blend of technology, business, and customers and sales. It kind of like
Oh
wraps
wow.
all of that up into one. And the purpose of the role itself is you are you're basically painting the vision of how this technology can solve your customers' problems to try to get them to sign the check to buy the licenses. But you don't have to actually deal with any of the implementation work. That's where like an Accenture or like a consulting company comes in. So that's how I made the transition from consulting to Salesforce. Like I had similar skill sets in
Mhm.
understanding like the client world, like what client services means, how to like understand requirements and like paint a vision.